Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. मैं Mufti Ehsan Waquar I am associated with National Bank of Pakistan as Chairman Shariah Board. Today we'll shortly discuss about Ijarah, inshallah. And to start off with, Ijarah is basically sale of usufruct, the beneficial rights of any assets. You can define that. It's the sale of the benefits derived from any fixed asset. Basically, when we talk about Ijarah, this can be also termed as services which we acquire from any person. Then that is classified as services Ijarah. How Ijarah is used in Islamic banks, basically as a mode of finance, that is a little bit typical. Usually Ijarah is used to get the benefit or derive the benefit from an asset. So whenever a customer is in need of a long-term finance, Ijarah as a mode is used where the customer need is addressed. For example, if a customer walks in and he wants a Ijarah facility in terms where he is seeking out to buy an asset on a long-term basis. For instance, he belongs to a textile sector and he needs to acquire some plants and machineries for his textile unit. He would approach Islamic bank and ask for this financing. The bank would structure this financing under the Ijarah mode, like the bank would acquire or purchase that particular asset from the supplier, and then it would lease out to the customer. If we compare Ijarah with the conventional term, it is very close to operating lease. So in other words, the bank would buy that asset, that plant or machinery particularly from that supplier, and then it would lease out to the customer for a certain period of time. So as I told you earlier, that it is a sale of usufruct for a particular or specific period under which the customer utilizes that asset and pays a rent on a periodic basis. Again, this arrangement of rent is calculated using a benchmark, and that benchmark can be the conventional benchmark or a specific benchmark to Islamic finance. Usually what happens, like in the previous example, that the customer requiring a textile unit approaches a bank and the bank purchases that unit and then leases out the similar asset to the customer for say 5 years, and there is a periodic payment of rents on each quarter. The flexibility in Ijarah is that the profit rate can be adjusted at intervals. Whenever there is an arrangement between the customer and the bank that they're going to revise the rent, say every 6 months or every year, that can be possible, and we can use a floating profit rate. So the rental would be revised after that periodicity agreed between the customer and the bank. Customer only uses the benefit which it derives from that machinery and pays the rent for that. Usually what happens is that the insurance cost and all other associated costs in importing and installation and other things are borne by the bank, and the bank then leases that asset, calculating all the costs together and associating it with a benchmark. That is how the profit is calculated. Usually the benefit in terms of tax is belongs to the bank in terms, because the asset is booked in the bank's balance sheet, and that is reflected as an asset of the bank. So all the tax benefit, the depreciation and other expenses are recorded in the bank's book, whereas the customer records it as an expense, the rent expense. At maturity, what happens that once the Ijarah period is completed and matures, after 5 years in this example, the asset then is transferred to the customer through a separate sale contract. Usually in Pakistan, we use a sale contract. Otherwise, we can also use a gift contract. It all depends how we calculate and amortize the cost. If we are amortizing the whole cost without any salvage value, then we transfer this asset at maturity through a gift deed. Otherwise, if we are booking a salvage value, then at the end of the term, at maturity, that asset is transferred through a sale deed with a value of that salvage value that is termed as the price for that sale. This is how basically Ijarah functions. Many sukuk related issues or sukuk structures are based on Ijarah. The first sukuk of Sitara peroxide here in Pakistan was also based on Ijarah, where the plants were bought by the bank and then was leased out to the customer over a period of time, and a periodic payment of rentals was received by the sukuk holders, and at the end of the term that asset was sold out to the customer on a salvage value. This is how basically Ijarah usually works, and how again SECP and State Bank has issued a particular standard for accounting, that is IFAS 2, where they have clearly elaborated the accounting entries which is required to be followed by Islamic banks. There is a Sharia standard on Ijarah Muntahiya bit-Tamlik also that has been adopted by State Bank, and with a little bit of customization. So the basic feature which differentiates from conventional financing is the risk. The risk associated with the asset is borne by the bank until the Ijarah matures. And after maturity, once it is sold out to the customer, then the risk is also transferred from the bank to the customer. Until then, all the risk and all the risk associated cost is borne by the bank, I suppose. If we go in detail how Ijarah basically is executed in banks, the first thing which is very important is the agreement of Ijarah, where the customer basically agrees to take that asset on rent and pays a particular specific rent for a specific period of time. So that contract is very essential. And when we talk about contract, that means that there is a lessee, there is a lessor, the bank becomes the lessor, the customer is the lessee, and the lessee is ready to make a periodic payment against the utilization of that asset. The asset should be a fixed asset which is not consumable, so it has to sustain and remain throughout the period of Ijarah. If the type of the asset is such that it is consumable, then Ijarah cannot be done on that particular asset, like any commodities, like any consumables, so any eatable items, that would be not a underlying asset for Ijarah. So there has to be a fixed asset like a plant or machinery, or we can also do, like in consumer finance usually they do Ijarah. So the car is the underlying asset which is rented out by the bank to the customer for that particular period, and the customer is ready to make periodic payments as rent. The difference which we can say that how Ijarah differs is that in case of total loss, it is the bank who is going to bear the loss. all the risk lies with the bank and the asset is recorded in the bank's book. The customer is only liable to make the payments and to use the asset in a prudent manner. So he knows if a person who has taken an auto finance based on Ijarah will acquire the car, utilize that and makes monthly payments of the rent. It is important for the user that he should have a valid driving license and he should know how to use the car in a prudent manner. If there is any negligence on the part of the customer, then he is responsible for the losses. Otherwise, the losses are to be borne by the bank. Secondly, what is important is that the expenses related to the utilization, like the fuel charges, the small wear and tear maintenance charges, that is usually borne by the customer. Whereas the major maintenance, if there is a breakdown in the engine, there needs an overhauling, or there is any other problem occurring which seizes the utility of that asset, in that case it is the responsibility of the lessor, in this case the bank basically, who needs to get that asset fixed, and then it would again lease that asset. The important part which needs to be noted is that during the period when the asset is not in a condition to be utilized, for that particular period the customer is not required to pay the rentals. The rents basically stops for that particular period, and once it is again in a condition where the utility can be derived from that asset, the customer shall pay the rent. The main documents that is used while executing Ijarah in banks is initially there is a proposal coming in, a request coming in from the customer that he requires certain asset and he is ready to take that asset on a long-term basis, on an operating lease basis. The second document, which is once the credit department approves and sanctions the limit for that customer, the bank calls the customer and then they enter into another agreement that is called an undertaking provided by the customer in order to assure that once the Ijarah asset is bought and is in place, the customer is ready to take that on Ijarah. Otherwise, if there is if this document is missing, the customer might back out. In order to what you can say, bound the customer in a manner that he is not allowed to back off, this document is signed off by the customer, assuring the bank that yes, once the Ijarah asset is available, he or she is going to take that on rent. The main document, that is the Ijarah agreement, is signed once the asset is available and is available at the customer's disposal, so he or she can utilize and derive the utility of that asset. Before that, Ijarah cannot be executed. Thirdly, as I told you, once the Ijarah completes, then there is a separate gift deed or a sale agreement, whatever the case may be. If there is a salvage value that is remained after the amortization, there is a sale deed on that price which is equal to the salvage value of the asset. These are the basic documents which are used. In case for any reason, if the bank is if the customer is not in a position to make rentals on timely basis, to pay the rentals on timely basis, what usually happens that if there is a delay, there is a charity clause which is imposed, and that the details of that clause is that if the customer basically undertakes that he would ensure to make the payments on timely basis, In case if there is a delay, then the outstanding amount for that particular period would include a charity, and that is also calculated very similarly like the penalty clause in conventional financing. But the difference is that the amount received under charity is not treated as an income of the bank. Rather, it is donated to any charitable organization and institutions, and it is not recorded as an income to the bank. The benefit of imposing this charity is basically to discipline the customer. If there is no deterrence in place, the customer at times might take advantage and would defer and evade rental payments without any particular reason. However, it is encouraged to the banks that small delays due to disorders in the cash flow of customer should be adjusted and absorbed without any penalty or without any charity. I think so this explains the entire Ijarah arrangement used by the bank as a mode of finance for long-term financing. Jazakallah. Thank you very much.